water-dependent industrial use. So the four were, the first one is the key to anything with Chapter 91. It has a requirement to access coastal waters. That's a portion of what the reg says. It actually says coastal waters or inland ponds and lakes, da, 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 da. We just told them to focus requirement to access coastal waters for research, testing, or development. In addition to that one key measurement, it also has to fall into one of the three that we did below that. There's a second provision that commercial fishing facilities, it's a little bit more extensive than that. Commercial fishing facilities, and then we extended that to say including those engaged in research, testing, or development related to commercial fishing safety, conservation, and sustainability. The third one is similar, facilities related to the construction, serving, maintenance, repair, or storage of vessels or other marine structures engaged in marine science and technology, including research, development, or testing. So for each of these, the third one, facilities for tugboats, barges, dredges, or other vessels engaged in port operations or marine construction, including those related to marine research, development, or testing. So we took three categories that aren't usually associated with marine science, technology, and marine science and technology, and said that if they have those same characteristics, then they should qualify as a water-dependent industrial use. It doesn't direct DEP to automatically consider those as water-dependent industrial uses. It gives them the discretion to say, what exactly is going to be going on at this facility, and does it have the same characteristics that we would normally expect to see at a water-dependent industrial activity?
Does that mean that does the contour of that become true? And that means that a business like Rose's is not allowed in the harbor, and they fix any kind of vessel that comes in the door.
Why would that be the case?
Well, then why would you be asking for these exceptions if you can already do it? Why would you be asking for these applications if
You can already do it? That's a very good question. First of all, there are some unknowns with Chapter 91 licensing. To some extent, they depend on who's in control of the various state agencies, who's your license writer, what's the current thought regarding water-dependent industrial uses. By having this as an amplification that's been approved, it makes it clear that if you have one of these types of businesses that has these water-dependent industrial use characteristics, even though it's not specifically called out in the regs, that it would then at least be eligible for water-dependent industrial use.
But does it ultimately do the converse, which is say that vessels that aren't listed in here aren't allowed?
If I may, I think this is an amplification. What's in there is still in there. This is added to.
Yeah.
It's not in place of what's already in there. This
Right.
is an addition. So
The amplification cannot prohibit what's already allowed. Yeah, I know, it makes your hair hurt.
Well, it's kind of, it makes no sense at all.
Well, can I add just a little bit
Sure.
of how this came about? It's been helpful to have Tom help us because he really understands the state, how much flexibility there is at the state. For example, we can't tell DEP what to do in any way. But what we did is we used a lot of scenarios of the kinds of uses we've been hearing about and kind of tried to test fit. And we in Gloucester too have had the same concern as the state of having, pure research that doesn't use the water at all. That was never kind of what the community as a whole wanted. So just having a requirement to access the coastal waters suddenly enabled all those firms that are involved, that their whole work revolved around doing something out in the ocean, suddenly they can try to fit into one of these other three categories. And if you're a research development or testing firm, and you do work out on the ocean, and you have that requirement for access, you suddenly have a place to hang your hat. When you go to apply for your license, say, look, I fit into here, and this is why I fit in Gloucester. It's been thought about and talked about.
Just, can I just jump in? But this is not all of the characteristics of a water-dependent use. We only picked the ones we thought were applicable, but there are others, including boatyards, dry docks, other facilities, manufacturing facilities relying primarily on bulk receipt of shipment of goods and so forth. So there are a lot of others that are in the regulations.
Has this already been submitted, or we're waiting for an answer, or where does it
We,
stand?
I want to tread carefully because the state has been very good about reviewing stuff for us. I would say this is in pretty good shape in terms of state approvability. I would reserve them some flexibility to run it up the chain for their, in the final approval process. But we went through it with both CZM and Ben Lynch at DEP to make sure they were comfortable with the language.
And the answer is they've been consulted, but nothing has been submitted.
Nothing
Nothing
has
is
been
submitted to them until we submit a draft plan. And we should have a draft for full review by the end of this week or by Monday at the latest. We're just pulling all the pieces together.
And then it is the mayor who actually submits the plan. We
Actually,
recommend
it's the planning representative of your city, which is myself.
So the administration.
Yes.
But nothing will happen until the harbor planning committee
Oh,
signs
that's
off
right, I
on
would
it.
never, you can, yeah. I would never submit anything without.
It just seems to me like you're playing the same game that they play, rather than being more inclusive. We're all sitting here trying to define how many angels can dance in the head of a pen, which is just pure folly. It doesn't work.
Well, I would say the first part, I would agree with the first statement. We are playing the same game that is played because that's how the regulations are written, for better or worse.
Of
That's,
course. It's our government.
that's the way it is. So, I fully agree with that we are trying to do this to make this as flexible as possible from a licensed rider's perspective. And I can stay here for as long as it takes if you have questions about how this actually gets implemented, because it's really hard to get to hand. I mean, I've been working with this stuff for years and years. It took us, quite a while to sort of say, does this really work, and how do we get getting to this point took quite a while. So, if you have questions, fire away. Yes.
This might come out of left field, but we've had 2 or 3 maritime summits, so we've looked at the rural economy piece in a pretty substantial way for us. Are these amplifications designed to be able to encompass some of the types of businesses that could come out of what we've looked at in those summits, Sarah? I mean, is that partly why these amplifications are written?
Yes,
So that we
and
could-
also that the summits have informed the way we ask, because we didn't know what kinds of diverse activities were out there before we held those summits. So then as we started to see them, then it became clear that it was hard to, in the regulations, to make it clear that they were permittable, and that it was hard to attract people to the city without any feeling that they would be allowed, that they would be encouraged or have some way to be a primary use. So this is written as a direct result of that.
Yeah.
I just want to say the only part that really bothers me a little bit and worries me a little bit is opening the door to the barges and the dredges and all that, because do we really want to be a port for offshore mining and whatever they're going to do?
That's already in there.
That's already in there.
Yeah.
We can already do that right now?
Yeah.
Then why is it in under the amplifications?
Well, what I took was,
Let me show what you added.
yeah,
Included.
this was basically what was in the regs. Not all of that segment, but that's, the key to chapter 91 is that we're required to access coastal waters. There was some more language, but that was already in there. This one says commercial fishing, processing, and facilities, I think. So then we just added this part. This one, it goes all the way to other marine structures. I may have changed,
Okay,
they
yeah.
start a little bit differently. This one is all the way to here, so that it's clear when someone's reviewing this at the state level, that we're actually taking the language in the regulations and saying, here's our clarification. This, maybe this will help explain why I think this language is also helpful. One of the most frustrating things that we deal with in dealing with Chapter 91 is people ask a very straightforward question, and we have to say, it depends. It depends on a lot of different factors. One of the factors in a license, in a municipal harbor plan, in a DPA master plan, is how do you frame the project that you're working on? And that doesn't mean lying about it, but for instance, if you have a company that you're doing research and it's directly related to the commercial fishing industry, if you're a researcher and you come in and say, this is a research facility that I want to permit, chances are you're not going to get your Chapter 91 license in the water dependent industrial use zone in the DPA. If you come in and say, I do research and I need access to the water, and what I'm doing is directly related to the commercial fisheries industry, you have a much better chance of getting that license. Kevin and I had this discussion earlier today. He's an economist. I loved working with him on this project, but we speak entirely different languages. He said, so what we have to show is that a project has a nexus along the waterfront. I say, your project would never get permitted. But that same project where you say, I own that company and I require direct access to the water because I'm bringing in, I don't know what. I'm bringing in something that requires access to the water for testing, that will likely get permitted. So this is also a guidance to anyone who's thinking about locating a facility in Gloucester on how to structure, how to get your mind around the regulations. Don't think of it as a research, as marine science and technology. Think of it in one of these categories, and it might fall out that it's actually permittable. They say that they're required, you can't say that you can't do them. So that's a one level of sort of restriction. This is where we struggle a bit, is they can't tell DEP what's a water dependent industrial use. So even though you might want to say, oh, we tried this, marine science and technology really looks and sounds and acts like a water dependent industrial use, you can't do that. The regs specifically say that you cannot, lost where I was, and you cannot make an amplification that reasonably affects the ability of DEP to exercise discretion in the interpretation and application of all the relevant provisions of the Chapter 91 regs. So you can't say if it's a duck, it's really not a duck. You have to give them some discretion in making that decision. So that really affects how you structure the amplification. What we came up with, and I apologize, the next two slides have a lot of words on them. Were 4 amplifications to provide clarity and guidance to DEP that marine science and technology activities with the following characteristics may be considered water-dependent industrial uses. So what we did was we took portions of the existing regulations and broadened them out to say that if they had these characteristics, if a marine science and technology firm, business, operation had